Hey guys, I just want to go over Black nationalism and Black power at the start of this week so you can understand the topics of this week a little bit better. We're going to be talking about Malcolm X and the Black Power movement, including the Black Panthers. So if you understand what Black nationalism is, it's easier to understand this week's topics. We're going to start with Malcolm X and Black nationalism, then we'll move into Black power. So Malcolm X was a member of the Nation of Islam, and therefore he spoke for Elijah Muhammad, who was the leader of the Nation of Islam. But he did keep some of his own beliefs, and later on he broke away from the Nation of Islam and created his own organizations like Muslim Mosque Incorporated and the Organization for Afro-American Unity. But throughout most of the time, he did espouse a lot of Black nationalist ideas. These weren't his own ideas. I mean, they were his own, but he didn't come up with them. Black nationalism had been around for a long time. You can think back to Marcus Garvey in the 1920s and Harlem Renaissance and his whole back to Africa ideas. But the main ideas of Black nationalism include racial pride, the idea of economic and racial independence, and Black separatism. I've got some quotes to kind of show what these mean. So Malcolm X in his speech ballot or bullet said, the political philosophy of Black nationalism means that the Black man should control the politics and the politicians in his own community. Don't be throwing out any ballots. A ballot is like a bullet. You don't throw your ballots until you see a target. And if that target is not within your reach, keep your ballot in your pocket. So again, the belief that Blacks need to control politics. There need to be Black politicians that run Black communities so that they really have Blacks' best interests in mind, and that if there aren't Blacks to vote for, maybe it's best not to vote. Here's a quote about the economic beliefs of Black nationalism. He says, so the economic philosophy of Black nationalism means if we own the stores, if we operate the businesses, if we try and establish some industry in our own community, then we're developing to the position where we are creating employment for our own kind. Once you gain control of the economy of your own community, then you don't have to picket and boycott and beg some cracker downtown for a job in his business. So the idea is that if whites control businesses, they basically control Blacks. Blacks need to control their own businesses so that they can give Blacks jobs and not be controlled by whites. He's also got part of like the social philosophy of Black nationalism, and he talks about how that they need to remove the evils, the vices, alcoholism, drug addiction, and other evils that are destroying the moral fiber of our community. In believing in racial pride, he said, if Blacks are committing crimes or are addicted to drugs, it's hard to be proud of themselves. And so we wanted to get rid of those so Blacks could experience more racial pride. And then this quote just goes to explain Malcolm X's views on guns, because oftentimes Malcolm X is viewed as a more militant character who didn't always espouse nonviolence. And the reason he didn't is because he kind of thought Blacks needed to have guns for self-defense. So here's a quote about that. He says, last but not least, I must say this concerning the great controversy over rifles and shotguns. The only thing that I've ever said is that in areas where the government has proven itself either unwilling or unable to defend the lives and the property of Blacks, it's time for Blacks to defend themselves. Article number 2 of the constitutional amendments provides you and me the right to own a rifle or a shotgun. This doesn't mean you're going to get a rifle and form battalions and go out looking for white folks, although you'd be within your rights. I mean, you'd be justified. But that would be illegal, and we don't do anything illegal. So that last part is kind of the part that some people think is a bit controversial, especially. But he's saying, whites have been killing Blacks for a long time, and that Blacks would be probably justified in killing whites, but he says he doesn't believe in that. He says that would be illegal. We don't do anything illegal, but he does believe that Blacks should have guns to be able to defend themselves and their property, he says. So that's just a little bit about Malcolm X and Black nationalism, so you can kind of understand that. But if you have time to watch the video Malcolm X, if you have Netflix, I'd watch that. It's pretty good with explaining a lot of Malcolm X's beliefs and things that he spoke about. And if you don't have time to watch that, just use some of the other resources in Schoology to kind of understand Malcolm X. Okay, so the next thing to talk about is the Black Power movement. And the Black Power movement, basically what you need to know is that this started kind of at the end of the civil rights movement, or towards the end, when the mainstream civil rights movement was kind of dying down, especially after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. A lot of the blacks moved towards more black power groups, and it was considered a more militant branch. They didn't always espouse complete nonviolence, and they also didn't necessarily espouse integration. So the Black Power movement used the ideals of black nationalism, and it was very influenced by Malcolm X's ideals, but it encouraged blacks to create their own all-black organizations and political parties, and again wanted that racial pride and economic independence for blacks. So SNCC became a Black Power group, which, if you remember SNCC from Coming of Age in Mississippi, or from when we talked about, it was formed after the sit-in movement, which was very nonviolent, very much a part of the mainstream integration nonviolent movement. But later on, as blacks they gained rights, they gained, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of '64, but still didn't feel like they were gaining economic equality. A lot of blacks, poverty and crime and other issues that blacks faced. And so to create more equality, a lot of blacks started believing in the black nationalist ideals to reach that equality. The Black Panthers were also another black power group that are known as a more militant organization with some socialist ideals you'll read in their 10-point platform or program, etc. But they also were very community oriented and wanted to create a lot of community programs, those survival programs that you'll read about, etc. So if you think of, this kind of symbol of black power from the 1968 Olympics is a common picture of black power. And here's kind of a quote. It says, seems to me that the institutions that function in this country are clearly racist and that they're built upon racism. And the question then is how can black people inside of this country move? So that's from Stokely Carmichael's Black Power speech. He was a member of SNCC who kind of morphed black power into what we think of it today. And the idea is, how can this country move? Were some of those black nationalist ideals, these ideals, all black organizations, etc. So hopefully you can understand. So black nationalism were the ideas of racial pride, kind of self-determination, economic independence, and then the Black Power movement grew at the end of the civil rights movement, when a lot of blacks didn't see the whole nonviolent movement as getting them full equality and wanted something different and maybe even more militant to gain rights and equality. And so the Black Power movement grew in kind of late 60s and 70s to bring about that change, and the whole idea that the country is racist and things needed to change and black people needed to create that change. So that's just to give you some background on what you need to know to understand this week, but there's a lot more information in the folders and in the websites and the different resources for this week. So let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, have a great week.